first talk today, I would like to welcome Ken Mugrage. Oh, okay, I need to do that again. Yeah, come on, big round of applause. Ken, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Fantastic.
Good. Let's see if this turns on, see if I can do the tech thing.
Well, yesterday it took us like 3 DevOps engineers to get the TV sync to work, so we're doing good today.
Yeah, that's fairly typical, I'm glad to say. Cool,
Then.
thank you very much. So as you said, my name is Ken Mugrage. I work for a company called Thoughtworks that you've probably never heard of. We like to say we're the largest company that you've never heard of. There'll be a couple things in the middle of the deck that kind of look like I'm bragging, and that's not what it's for. So not trying to sell you anything here. Also my first time in Birmingham, so it's gorgeous. I have to say I'm very surprised. I was looking at the price of housing, and I live in the greater Seattle area, and yeah, it's a bit different. Yeah, so I don't know, I might be your neighbor here pretty soon. Just getting close to retirement time. So I titled this, Making Strategic Technology Choices in a Fast-Moving World. So I work for the Office of the CTO at Thoughtworks. Been there a little over 15 years. We're a little over 10,000 people. I've had the distinct pleasure or pain of working on every continent except Antarctica. And identifying things and communicating them and telling people what's going on is really hard. And it's always been hard. You know, we think of it as a fast-moving world right now, but it's always been hard. So the truth is, we don't make strategic technology choices. We actually enable them. Because you can't, at that scale, like you can't choose what's going to happen, right? Because markets are different, and clients are different, and that sort of thing. We're primarily a custom software delivery house, and so you know, what a bank is doing in India is different than what a retailer is doing in Australia. They have different markets, so we need to enable that. So one of the things that we like to do as technologists, at least I do, is look at the next cool, shiny thing. And so I have this chart that's incredibly new. It was first created in 1962, called the Diffusion of Innovations. And it's been used in other places. There's a book called Crossing the Chasm that claims that there's a jump from early adopters to early majority. Some people disagree, it doesn't really matter. But this kind of still holds true when you look at technology. The time scale might change, but it's still true where you have the innovators up there and the early adopters, and everybody says that's where we want to be. We want to be right at the cutting edge. We want to be right at the bleeding edge. And it can be cool, and it's a lot of fun, and I've had the pleasure of being there a few times, but you really need to ask yourself, is that really where you want to be? Okay, because your customers, your users, might not be ready. There's only about 16% of people in companies are in there. And so I love to put the latest feature in the app or whatever. And then my mother says, you changed it again. So part of the thing about being strategic about technology choices is making sure that you're doing what your customer needs, not what you think is cool. I think my favorite story about this one is Docker. I mean, I don't know how long some of y'all have been in the industry. I've been in longer than some of you have been around, but we were using containers in various flavors in projects I was working on 2002, 2003, and that's not when they came out. They came out before that. Things like Solaris Zones and Linux had a thing, and et cetera. And so were we early adopters of containers? Sure, but it wasn't popular until Docker came out, because Docker made it easy to use. There's a lot of other reasons, but that's really what it comes down to. So the other thing you have to think about is, when is a technology emerging? Is it emerging when it gets invented, or is it emerging when it becomes useful? So generative AI, natural language processing. We've been talking to Siri for years. We've had NLP, that's not new. In fact, I was watching a History Channel thing. There was a book that was from the 1500s, and they were trying to decode it, and they couldn't even tell what language it was in. And somebody at the University of Alberta took a look at, and they had a natural language processing thing that finally, after working with it, identified it as encoded Hebrew in 2016. And so, I mean, that wasn't 50 years ago, but it wasn't yesterday. And so you really have to think about that we're technologists, right? Don't look at something and say, oh, that's old news. I heard about that decades ago. That's fine, but when does it become useful to your organization and your customers? The other one that people love is the Gartner hype cycle. And this is absolutely true. If you think about it, I think we're right in the middle of my laser pointer is not going to show up, getting pretty close to the trough of disillusionment on things like generative AI. It's going to change our world, change our lives. We had a client in Brazil, I think it was, that when the whole thing came out, we were doing mostly their infrastructure, setting up their developer platforms, that sort of thing. And we had competitors in there doing other things, which is not uncommon in our world. And they basically said, hey, you can get rid of the Thoughtworks infrastructure people. We're going to use generative AI to deploy all your infrastructure. We're just going to have Copilot do it. That did not go well. It didn't get past experiment stage. So be aware of this also, that the hype train is really easy to jump on, but what's the point? My favorite example here is blockchain. Kind of cool, from a technology perspective and what it does and so forth. But we pretty early on, in fact, if you look at a Looking Glass report, which is you'll see a little bit about that a few years ago, we were like, hey, this is really cool technology, but we don't really know what it's for. For Bitcoin or whatever, fine. But it's like, oh, but it ensures all the things. Well, only if it's a public chain, and you don't want a public chain if you're a bank. So what does it do? Do ask yourself that. Gartner's not the be-all, end-all, but the cycle itself is useful. Think about where your things are on this. Okay, so some things that we try to go through when we try to think about trends strategically. And I'm using trend here pretty generically. I'll get a little bit more precise a little bit later in the discussion. But some things that we try to think about when we're doing it. First off, even if you're right, even if you think this trend's going to take off, does that apply to your business? Okay, there's a new great service mesh. There's a new great chaos engineering thing. There's a new great whatever. That's great, but how does it apply to your business? Why would you invest in this? Do you have the skill set to take advantage of this trend? This is one of my favorite things that you don't even think about, right? So one of our clients wanted to use virtual reality to do some training. They're an aircraft manufacturer, and they're painting parts, and they want to play with things. Because it's aircraft, they have lots of regulatory catches, if you will. We have to think about all these different things and quality control and testing at a certain state and all that sort of stuff, even in their training. So we're like, so we just train our enterprise developers to do VR? Or do you go hire game developers and teach them about the enterprise? I don't know. None of these people had done three-dimensional user interfaces. On a flat two-dimensional interface, we can say, these are the only buttons that are there, these are the only menus that are there, what have you. In virtual reality, they might reach over here. Heck, with the new Apple things, they can click their finger down here. Eye tracking, retina tracking. Do we have the skill set to even take advantage of this? Heck, some of the AI stuff, we just bought companies. I'm sorry, but we did. Because that was the best way to get the skill set. Differential. Would you want to start a competitor to OpenAI right now? You better have $1 billion. Okay, what's it going to take to set your take on this trend aside from the crowd? Constraints. So I'm a big believer in autonomous teams. It's a huge DevOps principle. Showing my age a little bit, but my first DevOps days was the first DevOps days in the United States in Santa Clara 13 or 14 years ago. I organized Seattle for 5 years. I'm still on the global board of the organizers for DevOps days. And so I believe in autonomous teams. I believe in empowering whatever. But the truth is, in enterprise, we can't use every cloud provider. We can't use every service mesh. We can't use every whatever. And so you really have to think about that. oh, Amazon's rolling out this really cool thing, but we're mostly on Google Cloud, but that's okay because I can do multi-cloud. But yeah, now you got contracts and billing and confidentiality agreements. I mean, think about what your constraints are, and they're not always just technology. In fact, they're usually other things. And then production experience. Once you build it, somebody has to run it. We have seen inside and outside our organization many, many, many generative AI experiments, almost none of which are in production, because nobody really knows what to do about it, and privacy policies and that sort of thing. And then customer fit. So is this in your customer fit, or are you going to have to go break into a new market? There's some things that I did not have to learn as a technologist called TAM is target. It's the size of the market, basically. And so you might have to go in and break into a new market, and that gets expensive. You must have all of these before recommending action, these 4 things that I'm going to show you here. This is a long time of doing this, saying that we can identify a trend and say this is cool, you guys should go learn about this. I have a swear jar. Every time I say guys on stage, I have to donate $10. You folks can go take advantage of this, but anyway. You must have all of these before recommending action. Number 1 is a 2-sentence definition of the trend. If you can't define it in 2 sentences, it's too big. And so the trend you're thinking about might be 10 trends. Okay, do I want to do evals for AI models? Okay, well, what is that? If you can't define it that quickly, then, and I don't mean what's good and bad and pluses and minuses and all that, just what is it? Evidence. I believe this because specific opportunities. It's fun. I probably did it more when I was younger than I do now, to break out your computer and play with the latest technology. And I had Docker set up on my laptop long before we were using it in anything production. So that's cool. But if you want your organization to do it, there's got to be an opportunity at the end. What's the customer need? What are we trying to fulfill here? Because again, if you're going to need budget and that sort of thing, you got to figure that out. And then actionable advice. If you're in a role like I am and you're saying, hey, 10,000 plus thought workers, go learn about this thing. I have to tell them what to do next. This is the training we have available. These are the actions that you should take in order to go next. But it won't all be good news. You have to have those. You should have these. I'm going to say you have to have these, but that's not the way somebody else entitled it. Explicit conversations about unintended consequences. What's going to happen if we do this? Are certain roles going to go away? Are we going to change the way we work? Are we going to get pressure from whoever? Are we going to enter into competitive situations we didn't know about? Does it mean we have to end of life some other technology because there's an implicit conflict? What are the intended consequences or unintended consequences? An understanding of the societal impact of the technology. We've all seen the things from years ago where, okay, we got these new, well, they're not new anymore, again, showing my age, but you go into a public restroom and you wash your hands. If you're a person of color, half the time they don't work. So what are the sensors that we're looking at? And an understanding of the trade-offs between trends. You can't do it all. Sorry. Wish we could, but we can't. But also, don't be afraid. We are not going to start naming bathrooms after everything that failed. We'd run out of bathrooms very quickly. Okay, so fetch, you go. But it isn't a bet if you can't lose. And by that, I mean you need to have the culture that allows that. You need to have a culture of experimentation. You talk about like psychological safety. Google did a study many years ago. What are the things the most successful teams have in common? And they expected it to be tech awareness or time in role or all those kinds of things. And it turned out to be psychological safety. People felt safe to say, that's not going to work. I don't understand. Hey, I need to take this week off. I got a thing going on at home, whatever. You need to have that culture that you can experiment and You can fail. So you go through and you have all these trends and you figure out what they are, and now you want to communicate them to the rest of the organization. Now this is the part that's going to sound a little bit like I'm bragging about some stuff we've done at Thoughtworks, because I am. But it's not saying come hire us. This is how we communicate this to the world. Everything I'm going to show you is available to you. You can use it for free, etc. Okay. So first off, what is it we're trying to communicate? Who has ever heard of Thoughtworks before? Who has used something we created? If you did not raise your hand, you are probably wrong. Over our years, we created cruise control, which some of you may have heard of. By the way, a lot of these trends, it's not good to be first. Cruise control was the first continuous integration server. That was in 2001. We created that. A couple of years after that, we were starting to do web apps. And we created a testing tool called Selenium. If you don't know, if you get poisoning from mercury, Selenium is what they give you. And Mercury Test Suite was the biggest product out at the time. So it needed an antidote, so we created Selenium. Hit 500 ThoughtWorkers, did ThoughtWorks University. 2007, we came out with Gauge, which was a kind of like, well, it's business case driven development. Who's ever heard of GoCD? I was the product manager for it, so oops. That was the first continuous delivery tool. That was the first time that the term continuous delivery pipeline got used. Jez Humble and Dave Farley, Jez was actually the product owner, had a different role and then became product owner. Jez Humble and Dave Farley wrote a continuous delivery book, came out in 2010. Jez is the one that created Go. So people think the term continuous delivery was first done in that book. It wasn't. It was actually done in the product a couple years earlier. So what's the point here? We are a company that believes in talking about and sharing technology stuff and our strategy and what's good and what works. And all of this stuff is open source. We were never a product company. We created it and released it to try to make the industry better. But how do we communicate it? How do we tell a thought worker in London that we did this thing in San Francisco and you should really be talking to your clients about it and taking advantage of it? So we couple it with a couple things. Oh, so, yeah, here's the challenge. Exploding growth and all these things. I'll let you look at this so that my marketing people don't get mad. No. But I mean, those are our goals. And we do take them seriously. I joke about it, but we take them very seriously. You know, we really do want to revolutionize the technology industry. And that's why, like, if you go to martinfowler.com, Martin Fowler's our chief scientist, all the stuff about data mesh and continuous integration, continuous delivery, and automated testing and architecture and all that. If you work for Thoughtworks and you write a book, you own the IP, not us. Because we really do want to revolutionize this stuff. So what we came out with is the Thoughtworks Tech Radar. So I'm going to go through what this is. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Looking Glass, which is a little bit different thing. And then I'm going to go in how we create the radar. The reason I'm going to do that is because it's a tool that you can use in your organization to do this. It's all, you can download it, it's open source, you know, et cetera. And we found it incredibly useful. It came out 10 or 12 years ago or so. What is it? So what we've done is we take interesting things. We call them blips. And we publish this twice a year. You can go to the website and download it if you want, see what we think about stuff. But we put these blips on this radar, just a visualization. One of our folks in Australia came up with this. And it helps us to communicate to other people what we're thinking about with result in relation to a specific piece of technology. I'm trying to remember which slides I put here. Yeah, so the things that are important are the rings. Now for us, not everybody uses it this way, but for us, these are a statement of fact. This is not opinion. This is not us saying you should do this. This is saying we are doing this. So what that means is that for something to be an adopt, we have to have been using it on, I think it's 2 or 3 paid clients. So it can be the best technology ever, but if we're not using it on paid gigs, and it has to be paid because that comes with lots of things. Can you support it? Can you test it? Can you prove it? Et cetera. Then it can't go into adopt. So please don't get angry if your employer, you know, you do the best tool ever, and it's not an adopt. It just means we haven't had the opportunity yet. Trial, the criteria internally is, again, we have to be trying it on a couple places. Assess is where now it is, people ask us, vendors ask us, how do we get on the radar? Well, you make a thought worker excited about what you're doing. I mean, we're doing blip connection right now. And the only way things get on the radar is if it's someone from Thoughtworks submits the blip. And then I'll go through what happens after that. And hold says proceed with caution. A few years ago, we used to say, we'll make fun of you in the bar if you're doing this, but that's actually not accurate. Again, hold could be for business reasons. So, for example, hold on using that cloud provider because we don't have a privacy agreement with them. You know, I mean, it's not, again, it's not a statement on is this thing good or bad, but in your organization, should people be using it? So, for us then, the quadrants, these are what they are. These are much more loosely held. For us, this is what made sense. Techniques, tools, platforms, languages, and frameworks. A lot of times there's conversation about, well, which is this a tool or is this a platform? Is this a language, a framework? Is this I don't care. The truth is that, we'll talk about it for a few minutes. If people aren't really sure, we stick it in one. The rings matter a lot. The quadrants don't matter as much. And all of this is on the website. I hate it when people make me read a slide. But here's the thing, and yes, I use generative AI. Does she have the right number of fingers? I don't know. The people managing the business do not care what programming language you're using. Okay? We do a lot of work in software-defined vehicles, and Rust is all the rage. The automotive manufacturers don't like Rust. If you ever lived in the Northeast, you'd understand that joke a little bit more. It really, they don't want to hear that. All they want to hear is that, hey, we're using a different language, it's testable because of this, it's easier to do because of that, it's what have you. You have to talk about things at a higher level strategic place for that. So Tech Radar is for practitioners. It's for most DevOps days, for y'all. The strategic technology advice, that kind of stuff, is more for the business people that don't care about which language. They want to know, am I using generative AI? Yes. Do I care which tool? No. So for that, we came out with a thing called Looking Glass, which is another report. I'm only going to go very briefly into this one because I don't think it's the right audience. But if anybody wants to more later, I'll be around all day. So this one is meant to be a constant report for business leaders. So instead of saying, like the question came up earlier, which service mesh do you use? And those products would show up on Radar as blips. They would not show up in Looking Glass. Something like use a service mesh might show up. But for this one, we try to be strategic. And by strategic, you can see kind of what I mean up there. It's not that we think it's, you're going to be a billionaire if you do this. If you do, frankly, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on a beach somewhere. But when you're doing this stuff, when you're communicating to your organization, parroting what they're already hearing everywhere isn't terribly useful. And it's a distraction. So strategic advice is when something else is perfectly reasonable. No, we're using AWS because. Well, wouldn't Google do this? Yes. But we chose this. And evidence and everything, so forth. But don't feel like you don't have to parrot everything, but also somebody doesn't have to be wrong for you to be right. I wish I could convince our media and politicians of that. But it doesn't have to be that someone's wrong in every discussion. So the way this is laid out, a little bit differently. Seeing now, and again, this should be a relative statement of fact. We really are seeing it now. We're beginning to see it. It's on the horizon. Adopt, anticipate. I'm not going to bore you with it. You can download the report if you'd like to see it. But this, again, is much more forward-looking. Like the things on the horizon are like post-quantum cryptography, stuff like that. So really brain-computer interfaces, those sorts of things, and where they might apply to business. Like we had retina tracking on this a couple of years ago. And it turns out that's a pretty cool feature of the Apple headset. And so not which one, that would be a blip. This is a lot of work. That was the timeline for last year. I have this because I'm actually the product owner for this publication. And so it is a lot of work. So don't think that you can accurately throw one of these together. You really have to think about what it is you want to do and how you want to produce it and that sort of thing. And also, you're going to miss things. So we came out with the 2023 edition at the beginning of December. The day after ChatGPT was launched. So our looking glass about the future of technology for businesses had nothing about ChatGPT. We had to publish an addendum. It's not going to always be right, okay? It's easy as technologists to say AI is not new, because it's not. But yeah, you're going to miss some things. Okay, so the real meat, putting these to work in your organization. How do you do this? Because that's really the goal of this talk. The goal of this talk is for you to say, hey, we need to be able to communicate. What are the things we're using? What are the things we're trying out? What are the things I don't want you to use? What have you. So how do you create, and specifically the radar, for your organization? So what's the value first? Number one is it's a living artifact. So we have a lot of clients that publish this, like they print it out, put it on the wall, so that when someone's making an architectural choice, they can look at it and they say, oh, I need to use one of these platforms. Which ones are we doing? Okay, that one's in Adopt, so I know somebody here has done that. I can go find out who and get advice. Ooh, that one's in Hold. I need to think about that inside my organization. No offense to the Redditor, but it's not the most reliable place of technology information sometimes. And you need to know what you're doing in your organization. But the funny thing is, the second paragraph there, and it's like a lot of things, right? The value is in the conversation. The radar is the output, that's fine. But the value is in that conversation of talking about what are the pluses and minuses and that sort of thing. And there are clients that use it for governance. There are clients that say, this is what you're allowed to use or not use. We don't do that, but there are people that do that. Okay, so how is your radar going to be different? First thing is, you've got to think about establishing your goals. What is it you're trying to do here? I just talked about a lot of different things. Is this gathering information for an executive? In that case, it's the wrong way to do it, frankly. But are you trying to understand what technologies to use, what to avoid? Spread knowledge, document, or whatever it happens to be. Think about why you're doing it. I think that's true with any project. You have to know the purpose of doing the project before you start the project, or you're doomed to failure. I shouldn't tell this. We just leveled some ground to put it in an above ground pool. We did not tell them it was for a pool. Pools weigh a lot. Did not work out well. It was level. It wasn't firm enough. And so it sunk. So why are you doing it? And what's the scope? So ours is for the organization at large, but it's perfectly valid if you're in certain organizations, like if you're in a bank. You have different customer sets, different technology sets, that sort of thing. And you might have a different radar for each one. So think about that and be explicit about it. Adapt the rings. So I already went through, these are our rings. Does that make sense to you? Should there be 3? Should there be 4? Should they be different names? It doesn't matter. Don't feel like you have to stick to a certain thing. Don't fit your needs into somebody else's mold. Okay, our molds are pretty good, I think, but go with your needs. And then revisiting the quadrants. Again, you already saw this slide basically, but they probably don't match yours. Maybe they do. I would say probably half of the people that build their own radar don't use quadrants at all. They just put things on rings, which is that slide. Okay, so what do you do in a workshop? If at all possible, do this in person. Okay, I live in just south of Seattle. My boss is in New York. The other team members I have are in Germany and Perth, Australia. And so we don't see each other in person very often. But if you can, do this in person. Because again, the value here is the discussion. It's the hallway conversation about the blip that just came up. That really matters. It's an expensive meeting. I mean, if I want to drop names, let's see, you got Rebecca Parsons, the CTO Emerita, Martin Fowler, CTO of Europe, Chief AI Officer, CTO of Australia. I mean, it's an expensive meeting to fly all those fun folks, but it's worth it. During the brainstorming sessions, write down the technologies on sticky notes. You'll see why here in a second. So what's the name of the blip? Everyone spend some time putting their sticky notes on the radar visual, which again you'll see here in just a second. It's just a physical version. Begin a vote. So you see how they're holding up cards? When you have a large group, if anyone's ever done like large meetings like this, you can't just talk over each other. You hold up the cards. Rebecca in the white you see there does not have a card in the air. She glances around the room, and if it's widely the same color, she moves on. If it's 50-50, now there's going to be a discussion, okay? But if you hold up your card and it's a different color, and you red for disagreement, but everybody else is green, well, sorry. But again, if there's a mix, then we want to talk about it a little bit more. Prioritize the ring discussion. I've already said that a couple times. It's more important to know if you're telling people they should do it than if it's a technique or a platform. If you don't come to a consensus quickly, move on. Everybody familiar with the term bike shedding? Yeah. So, if you ask a group of people how to design a nuclear reactor, the example came from the 60s when that was a very novel thing, you'll get a 5-minute discussion because nobody knows, and they'll just be like, oh yeah, the expert said do this, we're done. Ask them what color to paint the bike shed, and it'll go on for 3 hours because everyone's got an opinion. Okay? So the easier the problem, the longer the discussion. So yeah, if it's don't too long, put it in the parking lot. Don't go into a rabbit hole. And encourage discussion. Again, psychological safety. Disagreement is okay. There's been more than one time that the room has turned when someone said, yeah, I mean, it sounds great on the surface, but when things go wrong, not if, but when, they go really wrong. And you can chat about it. That's the visualization. Martin Fowler and Jamak, inventor of data mesh, if anyone cares. But that's literally what it looks like. It's that busy. So we limit ours. I think the hard limit's 110 blips because they just don't fit. And they started doing it this way. I say they because I'm not on the actual radar team. They started doing it this way to say that if it can't fit in stickies, then there's too many. So it's a physical limitation on purpose. When you put things into a Google Doc, all of a sudden a 9-page document's okay. So ways of working for the in-person discussion. Share what you know. Again, psychological safety. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Even if you're pretty sure no one's going to like this, no one's going to agree with it, your experience is valuable. Strong opinions loosely held. I mean, this is just a rule in general if you want to do if you want to work in any kind of global organization. Yes, you need to come in and have an opinion with evidence, but please don't just stick to it no matter what. Again, I wish I could convince our politicians and media about this, that you actually should take into account evidence and be willing to change your mind. Equal voice. I have a fairly loud voice of an old gray-haired white guy. If I come up here and if this is a horrible talk, somebody might say, oh, Ken had a bad day. If somebody doesn't look like me comes up here and has a talk, oh, they're just up there because of what they look like. Make sure you give an equal voice to everybody. If you have to do that with a totem to talk, whatever you have to do, make sure you're doing that. And a living document, I already talked about that a little bit. Be engaged. If you whip out your phone during a radar meeting, there's a reasonable chance that Rebecca's going to throw it out the window. A lot of it depends on what's outside the window. She wants it to survive, but she will head for a shrub if she can. And then same with side conversations. Have a lot of breaks so you can have the side conversations. They're really important. But remember, these are hard. Tips and tricks. Real world. I talked to you earlier. How does this apply to our actual things? What's the project experience like with leveraging next technology? Wow, okay, yeah, it was really easy to roll out, but oh my gosh, it was hard to test. That's important, right? Yeah, it adds higher performance. I'm also the host of the Thoughtworks podcast, and we were talking about creating more green algorithms in our software. And people were like, yeah, I can optimize this algorithm for my application, and I can save 20% of energy every time the application is run. And so I said, well, how many users do you have? How often does the application run? Oh, it's run like 1,000 times a week. Okay. How often does your continuous delivery pipeline run? A lot more than that. They were spending far more energy, outputting far more carbon, testing the thing than they were saving. Okay, so think about that. What's the actual experience like? Recommendations, obviously. Talk about the alternatives. There's alternatives to everything. It is okay to put a good technology on hold. We put something on hold a few years back that was a commercial product, and their VP of marketing called ours, very unhappy. And we're like, it said explicitly in the thing, it's not that it's bad, it's just that there's two that are really, really close, and if you're starting a new project at Thoughtworks, we would rather you use this one than that one. There are no thou shalts. If the other one works better for you, then by all means. Okay, but it was on hold because we made a different choice. So know what those are, and don't be insulted. Again, I talked about constraints already, production experience already. Documentation. I'm a huge fan of continuous delivery, but oh my gosh, has the customer suffered. We roll out all these new features, and we don't train support people on what they are. We don't tell our users what to expect. We don't tell our users where to find the button that we moved because we thought it looked better over there. Okay, think about this a lot. What's the guidance that we have? What can we share with the organization about, hey, here's this thing, but if you're going to use it, here's what you need to know. That's you talk about the difference between deployed and released. Again, not really a radar thing, it's a continuous delivery thing. But you can deploy an application. I don't think it's released until the salespeople, the support people are all trained, the documentation is updated. Hopefully, we've done some TikTok videos and some YouTube shorts about it. No, I don't watch either one of those things, but I'm not the target. Okay, so that's what it takes to release software, is to actually educate people on how to use it. And then the visualization. Again, the real value is in the discussion. But if you want to visualize it, if you want to take a picture of that, you can. And I'll send out links later, or again, make them available to the hosts here. But it's a publicly available tool. You can use the tool, you can create a Google Sheet, put all your things in, and we'll build the visualization. If you want to download it all from GitHub and do it offline, feel free to do that if you don't want to make your stuff world readable. If you're a bank, please don't make your stuff world readable. Especially if you're my bank. But that's how you can go visualize this stuff. Now, I am way ahead of schedule because I was supposed to start, I think, at 9:10, so I'm looking around for an organizer. But this is where the things are. That said, that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions at all. I don't know, Mikhail, do you want to, I don't dance. I sing very badly.
I don't dance either, for the record. And yeah, nobody's going to want to hear me sing.
I actually was in the U.S. Marine Corps band, and when I went to music school, and they had a thing where you had to sing a major fifth or whatever. And I had my music theory teacher going, how can you play an instrument? How is it that you're literally tone deaf. How is it that you play an instrument at a reasonably high level?
Well, I was in band, choir for about 4 days until they kicked me out. So, all right, thank you, Ken. Can we have a large round of applause, like an extra large? Can we do this for 10 minutes?
Yeah, you got 10 minutes. It's not my fault. They started early. No, I hate it when talks end early. Late's better, so sorry.
I think it was a great talk, though. Yep. Content is what's important.
There you go.
You can run early.
I'm happy to answer any questions about whatever you want. I mean, what's it like working in Uganda? I don't know.
All right, I guess we're going to do the mic run.
Yep.
All right, Brent Barnes, Optimized Technical Solutions. Just have a question about one of the charts.
Yep.
You were talking about the adopt So evidently it's going to take a time period to actually make those decisions. Can you walk us through that? Like how much, because you have to put energy into it, initially to even create that chart. So you have to put energy and manpower. Can you kind of go in depth a little bit about that?
Sure. So for us, adopt, again, is a statement of fact. It's not for the radar, it's not a prediction of here's what's coming, because then, by the time you do all the work, matter of fact, I'll tell a little side story, and I think I will illustrate your point. I was in a meeting the other day, and we were talking about making bets on emerging trends. And we had a new CEO a few months ago, and we have some board of directors changes and that kind of stuff. And the marketing person says to me, she's like, okay, so when we're making bets on new trends in technology, we need to provide evidence in the form of like social media and how many people are talking about this, and it's in use at these places, and what are the ROI examples and what have you. And I'm like, okay, so you're choosing to be, here, let me go back here. Okay, how do I PowerPoint? So you're choosing to be early majority or late majority, which is fine. That's 70% of the market. Okay, but if you want me to show you social media posts and ROI stuff and that kind of stuff, you literally can't be an innovator or an early adopter. And that's okay. I mean, our target is mostly enterprises. They don't want to be in that thing. So that's okay, but that's what you're saying. And she was like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if it's new, then nobody's tweeting about it yet. Okay, I mean, and they're out there getting patents and they're doing that kind of thing, and they're not talking about it yet. So if you want to make evidence-based decisions, that's great, but you can't be an innovator or an early adopter. You just can't. Now, when the radar adopt, for us, that is a statement of fact saying that we are using it or have used it on paid clients. And so that is a longer living thing. And so something like EKS came up earlier. Showed up in Adopt years ago. We have used it. We are using it. If something doesn't move over a year, it drops off the radar. That doesn't mean our opinion has changed. It actually means it hasn't changed. And so it just stays there. And things usually, once they hit Adopt, they sit there for quite a while because it's not a predictor. The Looking Glass one is more of a predictor, and we don't try to predict at the micro state. We don't try to predict a product A versus product B. That make sense? All right.
Again, we got one more
Yep.
over here.
Hi, Steve Hallman. One of the things that came up in a lot of conversations with some people yesterday was that often finding a specific technology or even a process to use is not the hardest part. Like almost all of these are proven somewhere, you can show evidence. It's usually either internally, some of your developers, or externally, someone with the client or management not wanting to change or being resistive, or even maybe amazing developers that you have that are like, I'm just not going to do that, I refuse. And occasionally you're going to have people that you just lose no matter what. What are your best recommendations for people techniques to get people on board or to transform people once an adoption decision for a technology or a practice has been made? And do you think it's ever possible to prevent just losing that 1% of people that are just stubborn and would rather leave than transform?
Yeah, so I'll start with the last part, which is it possible to avoid it? No. It's not possible to avoid it. You are going to lose some people. Charles Darwin said evolution is not required, but neither is survival. Okay, so there are people that don't want to move along with what technology is, and I'm not well then fire them. I'm not saying that at all, but things are gonna change. That's the only what do they say? The only constant is change, or something like that. As far as socializing and get people on board, my first piece, most important piece of advice is to read everything ever written by Dr. Linda Rising. She's a psychologist that looked into organizational change and how to run meetings, how to get evangelists to talk about stuff, to get champions to do it, all of the psychological, and not tricks, but the tools to use to say, hey, this is what's in it for you, that sort of thing. A key part of that is the thing I just hinted at. What's in it for them? Oh, well, testing is going to be easier. You're not going to get as many support calls. You're going to get everything. If there's nothing in it for them, then you need to look back at yourself. Well, why are we doing this? If it's not making the organization better, why are we really doing it? But I recommend, I think it's called Driving Change, but Dr. Linda Rising is definitely the author. And if your media choices are different, she's spoken around the world and she's on YouTube and other places. But like they got down to where like lunch and learns are a great thing. And they learned that the people are most receptive to change when you give them chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so take that for what you will. Yeah, unfortunately, it might look like me if you had too many chocolate chip cookies. But the organizational change is definitely the hard part. Kubernetes is easy compared to people, frankly. But a lot of it is about championing. It's about an ongoing thing. So like I can send out an email or have my boss send out an email to all Thoughtworks and say, hey, here's this new cool thing we're going to look at. But it doesn't make sense if we're not enabling them. A great example of that, well, an accurate example of that, I guess is a better way to put it, is the whole generative AI thing. So it's taking off, and we, like every organization, when organizations reach a certain size, then they mirror the public. So you're going to have every type of person, every sort of thing. So we had people that were like, oh, I was doing this 30 years ago. We just didn't have the CPU power from NVIDIA. It was the same thing. To, oh my gosh, we're all going to lose our jobs, to everything in between. So what we did is we identified some people who were really passionate about it, really wanted to learn about it, what have you, and we had them create courses where we had a generative AI boot camp, basically. It was online. You can come in and teaching you about prompt engineering and those types of things, and what is a hallucination and how to get around that, and should we use retrieval augmented generation? Should we use this? Should we use the other thing? But it's an ongoing, today I can log into internal systems and take those courses and learn about those things. So we had to make the resources available. The other thing is proof points. We had to prove it works. And so, like if you're watching the Microsoft, was it Ignite? I can't remember what it was. About 15 or 16 months ago, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, came out and he's like, hey, you gotta check out this application. This is the first time I've seen like generative AI, natural language processing, make a massive societal impact. There's an application in India called Jugalbandi. So India is great. I used to go there pre-COVID at least 4 times a year, but there's hundreds of languages. And not the greatest reading, writing skills necessarily in the entire country, but everybody has a cell phone. Okay, and data is free there. It's kind of opposite of here. And so what they did is they wrote an app where a person speaks into their phone. It sends the recording, not the dictation or whatever the recording, but the recording to the system, which translates it, uses an LLM to look at it, queries a local database for their different social programs. Like, can you get help with water on your farm? Can you get assistance with food? They call them entitlement programs. Entitlement's kind of a dirty word in the US. It's not, it shouldn't be. But what are the things you qualify for? It finds all that information from trusted data, so it's not doing hallucinations, converts it back to their language and sends them an audio file so it speaks. So they can literally have a conversation with their phone about how do I get help getting water from my farm. And that's all LMs and it's all back end. And we wrote a significant portion of it. But we did that to prove to everybody this isn't just to put developers out of jobs. There are societal goods that we can do with this kind of work. It's not just about your bank chatbot. So we had to make it attractive. Cool. Anything else?
Any other questions? Oh, we got one.
Gus Rojas, a lot of the principles and things that you were showing, they look a little bit like domain-driven design type of principles. Is that even a consideration of what you do, or have you looked at it? I know Martin Fowler is slightly, kind of peripherally involved in that, but
yeah, I don't think it's intentional in any of this work. I mean, it probably does show up Because, yeah, I mean, well, yeah, Martin's real big in like making the radar and that kind of sort of thing. I'm not an expert in that area. So if there is, it's not intentional. Good. All right, thank you very much. I'll be around most of the day and happy to do open spaces or whatever we need to do.
All right, thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Big round of applause, y'all. What a way to kick off DevOps days. You know, I was thinking what you were talking about earlier about how do you not lose the 1%? You really can't avoid losing some people.